We're talking today with Laura Maylene Walter about her first novel, Body of Stars. Hi, Laura.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Body of Stars seems to be a blend of sci-fi, fantasy, mysticism. Wow, how would you describe it? What category?
Yes, that's a great question, and it's been one I've thought a lot about recently. I have always thought of it as literary fiction with a speculative bent. But I think there's lots of ways of describing it. It does have science fiction elements, dystopian elements, and I think overall, as I was writing it, I just wanted to write the story that I wanted to tell, and to not worry about what category it might or might not fit into.
Well, when we meet Celeste, when we first meet her, what is her world like?
Sure. So my protagonist Celeste lives in a world that is very similar to ours, except the markings, the freckles and the birthmarks on women's bodies can predict the future. So she lives in a society where women have this ability, but men don't. It's also a somewhat regressive society in terms of gender roles and gender identity. So she grows up knowing her body can predict the future, and also knowing that she has this power in a way, but also that it makes her vulnerable in the world as a girl and as a young woman.
I see. Well, what do they use to predict their fates and describe how mapping the future works?
Sure. So in this world, the patterns of the freckles and birthmarks, they really do predict certain future events. They can't predict everything, but there are very formalized predictions in terms of how the patterns are outlined on their bodies. So the society, this has been going on for a very long time, and they have developed what I think of as their Bible or their guidebook, and it's called Mapping the Future. And so this is a book that it includes diagrams showing, if your place for career markings will be on your right hip, and if your markings are arranged in this sort of way, that means you might have the potential to be a doctor one day, or you'll have a different kind of career. So people use this guidebook to interpret the markings. Sometimes the markings aren't very clear. Sometimes they're a bit up to interpretation. So there are professionals known as interpreters who are particularly skilled in what is considered an art form in a sense. And they, accept money to give readings to girls and women to try to shed a bit extra light on their future.
And then Miles, her brother, has a very special gift. What's that special gift?
So her older brother, Miles, is talented at reading markings, and that is notable because he is a boy. And this is one area in this society that women, it's considered in the realm of women to read markings, since women are the ones who bear the future on their bodies. It's considered that they are the best ones to read and interpret those markings on other girls and women. So there really aren't men in this profession. It's a bit taboo, and most men would never even think about it. It's just not something that they consider in their area of expertise. But her brother Miles, he's always been interested in reading her markings, and he does have a talent for it, and he can see some things and interpret some things that even professionals might miss. So that's a struggle for him too. He would love to grow up and become an interpreter, but he knows that based on his the fact that he's male, that he would be limited in that respect.
Now, the book is replete with charts, body charts, and to me, they resemble a sort of chi, that invisible life-giving forces that you find in acupuncture or something like that. How did you come up with such a complex idea, and what informed you or inspired you?
Sure. Well, when I came up with the idea, it was really simple. I was doing a writing exercise, and I was trying to come up with a speculative premise involving the body. And I think I just looked down at the moles on my arm and looked at the moles and thought, what if the pattern of how they were arranged could somehow foretell the future? So that was where the idea came from. And I took it from there. I started drafting the book. I was really compelled by that idea from the beginning. As I wrote, though, I started to realize I didn't quite understand how this would work. Like, how would these markings actually be able to predict the future? So over time, I had to figure that out and I had to understand it. And so I started in my notebook making diagrams just on my own. I would, draw a rough body and try to imagine where the markings would go, what they could mean. And so I was already trying to think that through when I came across a body diagram actually in an oddities shop where I live in Cleveland. And it was a page torn from an old medical textbook. And it showed a woman's body with arrows pointing to different parts, like for diseases, like where on a woman's body she might have health problems. And of course, it was from an old medical textbook. So it was, very outdated and old fashioned terms and names for things. But when I saw that page in the shop, I just held it and thought, this makes me think of my novel. So I bought it and took it home, and that sort of helped inform me as I thought about how the guidebook would explain where things are on the body. There's different category locations, and then the more minor details of how the patterns are arranged. So I kept all that in mind as I started making my own diagrams. The full body drawing in the book is illustrated by through my publisher Dutton. So that is an original illustration, but it was inspired by this old medical textbook of how women's bodies were viewed, which seemed to fit into the theme of my book of, kind of outdated looks at the female body and its powers and its vulnerabilities.
That's fascinating. Your characters seem to, yearn to know the future, and it's also a tale of deception and overcoming trauma and about women's freedom to choose their own destiny. Is that about right?
Yes, you summed it up well. There's a lot of themes going on in there, but that's
A lot.
accurate. Yes.
And you talk a lot about how women have suffered over male dominance and the female need to control their own future. I like the line that says the future is built not only on shadow, but on light, and that no future can break a woman on its own. Is that sort of the central message of your book?
I think you could say that. And those lines come from Mapping the Future, which the guidebook also has narrative sections that I wrote as well. And I think for the most part, the narrative sections in that book are less encouraging, I suppose you could say, and really point out how women in this society are objectified for their bodies for the future, and there's men tend to take ownership of them. And in the guidebook, though, there is also a sense that women should be revered for this, that it's a holy thing, that your body, has this basically magical power to predict the future. And so I think that's mixed up in there. It's very complex, where women are objectified and are made vulnerable in this world, but they're also considered very important and maybe magical. And so I think the guidebook also recognizes that. And a lot of dark things can happen to women in this world. And there's an acknowledgement of women have endured this for a long time, and women are strong and able to overcome. And so that's what I gave my character Celeste, that point of view, that grows, I hope, as the book goes on. But she takes it in a slightly different way to try to not accept all the darkness that comes her way as a woman.
Right, right. And this is your very first novel. How long did it take you to write? And did you believe that you would ever be really published? Or?
Well, yes, that's a good question. It's something I've been working on for years. So it's not the first novel I wrote, which is a very common story among novelists. Often they write a book or two before they write the one that they actually get published. So in terms of writing the book, I came up with the idea in 2012. I did not work on the book the whole time, and all straight through all those years, but on and off for years. The first draft I wrote in maybe 8 months or so. First drafts can go fairly quickly for me, but for me, the first draft barely the tip of the iceberg. It's and this book has changed so much from that first draft. The core premise and the characters are the same, but so much I had to rewrite. So it was a work of years of writing and then rewriting and revising and on and on and on. And all I can say is, again, this wasn't the first book I wrote, but it was the first novel that I was determined to not let go. And I didn't want it to turn into another drawer novel like the ones I tried before. I felt the premise was so electric for me that I wanted to keep going at it. I just had to keep believing. And I knew writers require persistence and they have to endure a lot of rejection. And so I did always hope and believe this would be my first published novel. So I'm very excited that that happened and it's now out there in the world.
Yes. And how many rejections did you have to endure?
Well, on this novel, not that many comparatively, but in the past, I tried to get an agent with another book, actually technically two novels, and I think I racked up over the years, over different projects, maybe 200 agent rejections at least.
Wow. Wow.
But everything, it taught me something along the way. And some of the agents who rejected me were very nice and thoughtful and wrote me long personal notes of rejection. And so they remembered me later on when it was time for me to try again. And that was really helpful. So it all helped build. And by the time Body of Stars was really ready, I didn't have to query that many agents. I got some rejections along the way, and then I stopped and revised again before I tried again, but it went so much more quickly. And I think I could just tell that I had reached a point with a project that I really believed in and that I felt good about. And I kind of hoped it would happen a little faster for me, and it did. And then I got an agent fairly quickly, kept revising, and the submission process went fairly quickly as well.
Who is your agent and how did you meet this person?
My agent is Erin Harris at Folio Literary Management, and she's fantastic. So when I was starting to really send out a few targeted queries for Body of Stars, I was reaching out to agents I'd had that past contact with, and a few referrals and a few kind of cold queries. And Erin actually came to me. So she had read, I was a finalist in a story contest, or it might have been a published story, but she had, heard about my writing elsewhere and reached out to me and just asked, do you have a project that you're working on right now? And it was the perfect timing because I was just querying Body of Stars. So she did come and find me, and this is also not too unusual. This happens. Some agents are really proactive about seeking out potential new clients. And this wasn't the first time this had happened to me. I've had agents reach out to me over the years, but this was the time that clicked and worked. And so she made me an offer of representation. I had a few other agents in the mix, and I talked to all of them. And I just thought, Erin, I could tell she was going to make me work the hardest. I could tell, she's more of an editorial agent, and she had some revision thoughts that I thought were really, really good, that resonated with me. And I remember thinking when I had to make that final decision, I thought she's going to make me work harder, and I might, not that I would regret it in the long run, but I knew I would have work ahead of me that I'd probably question why. But I think she got help me write the best book I could. And so it has worked out really well.
Great. And then how long did it take, Erin, to sell your book? And tell us a little bit about your editor.
Sure. My book is published by Dutton at Penguin Random House, and my editor is Stephanie Kelly at Dutton, and she's fantastic. And the submission process went fairly quickly. It was out for maybe 5 or 6 weeks, I can't remember. And I had several phone calls with editors, which was really exciting and nerve-wracking. And so I talked to Stephanie on the phone before the offer came in. And, I just thought she had really smart thoughts about the book. She had really good insights. And I felt good about it. Dutton is such a great publisher, and they're really, long-standing and under Penguin. And so I felt really, really good about it. And she has been, I feel so lucky. I mean, you hear lots of different stories from writers and their first publishing experience. All publishers operate differently, and it's a difficult process. Sorry, my cat just joined us.
That's
Yeah. Yeah, I could see your dog wandering around. And so she just had, I had been working on this book for a number of years and had been revising it already on my own for so long that I already felt I really knew the world well, and I felt I had a good handle on it. But Stephanie had really good insights, and she made me look at it in a new way. And she had suggestions and thoughts and questions about the world that let me get back in there and work on it more, because it is a complicated world. It was hard to pull off.
It's complicated. Well,
Yeah.
what manuscripts are you working on now? Can you tell us a little bit about the story or stories? Or do you not?
So well, I can talk a bit. So I am working on another novel, but it's still in a place where I can't talk about it. I'm trying to figure it out, but it is, I think certain themes in my work will probably recur, even if the books end up being different, about women setting out on their own and being very strong, and some speculative elements in there. And I have a few short stories that will publish sometime soon, and they're both also speculative in nature. One is maybe a bit more science fiction. All I can say is that it does deal with elements of predicting the future, but in an unusual way, and actually in a way that was inspired by the coronavirus pandemic. It's not about the pandemic, but it's inspired by it. So that's all I can share about that one. And the other story is a really fun one for me. It's more of a magical story set in a world where a girl has a pet Satan, like a little pet devil instead of a dog. And so I had done a lot of research just reading about Satan, like the history of the conception of Satan and Satan in artwork throughout the years. And so that's also why I love being a writer. You get to research things that maybe on the average day other people wouldn't think about too much, but you get to really get in there and have fun with it. So I really enjoy it.
Great. Tell us a little bit about I understand you have several scholarships and grants and other works. You want to tell us anything about your background?
Sure. So I have always wanted to be a writer. I've always, worked toward it fairly seriously. I studied literature and writing in undergrad. But then after college, I did not go on to an MFA. I made that decision. I wanted to enter the workforce and, try to get some job experience in the real world. And that began a stretch of time of at least 10 years that I think was really important, because I was working in kind of regular office jobs and I was still writing on the side. And I think all writers, no matter what their background or their job is, they all have to find a way to do that, to keep writing, even through real life and regular life. And so I was going to local writing groups. I was making writing friends. I was submitting my work there. I was submitting my work to literary magazines. And so this was a time that I really learned how to be a working writer while having a day job. I did eventually get an MFA a little bit later. I wanted to take a break from working and just focus on my writing. So that was really helpful. But again, it was just the constant work. And through all that constant work, I did have some good fortune with some fellowships. I was a Tin House Scholar, which means I went to the Tin House Summer Workshop, which was fantastic. I received a grant here. I live in Ohio, from the Ohio Anna Library Association. So I received a grant. It was like a young writer grant. And so just things like this. And they really helped me along the way, because again, usually in a writer, you just have long stretches where you might not be publishing anything, or, you might not be getting awards all the time, but getting these things kind of over time it encouraged me and kind of drove me to keep going with the hopes that I could publish a novel one day. And here I am.
And what would you say to writers who are struggling to break in? Do you have some advice?
Yes, I think one thing I think about sometimes is, and I mean this to be encouraging, it might sound discouraging at first, but all writers trying to publish a book are probably facing a lot of rejection in different ways, from agents, probably a lot, or other forms of rejection. And it can be really discouraging and frustrating. And I've been there, we've all been there. And I remind myself that in the writing world, And acceptance is not the default. The default is actually rejection, which I know sounds really harsh, but no one owes you an acceptance. There's so much competition. There are so many writers out there trying to get what you're trying to get. And that helps me when I think, okay, I just need to work on something until it's ready where they can't say no, or they really don't want to say no to me. And that has helped me over the time. And it's helped me realize as I look back at some of my older work that I can admit to myself now that, hey, that wasn't ready at the time. But I kept going, and I didn't give up through the rejection, and I got better. And now some things are ready and getting published. So that would be advice, as writers are trying to find their way in through the persistence of this career. To me, I view that as hopeful. Like, if you keep going, you'll get better, and then fewer people will want to say no to you.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice. Well, Laura Maylene Walter, author of Body of Stars, just out from Dutton Penguin Random House. We appreciate you talking with us today.
Oh, thank you so much, Doris, for taking some time to talk with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.